What happens when faith turns to fanaticism? When belief becomes a weapon? This is the story of Elias, a young man trapped in a community consumed by its own righteousness, and the woman who dared to challenge their twisted faith. A story of secrets, betrayal, and the fight for justice. If you're ready for stories that will stay with you long after you've heard it, subscribe and join our community. The air hung heavy in Hopewell, a small town nestled in the rolling hills of North Carolina, thick with the scent of pine and the hum of cicadas. It was a place where time seemed to stand still, where the past clung tightly to the present, and the future was a hazy, uncharted territory. Hopewell was built on faith, a stronghold of conservative Christianity, where life was governed by a strict code of morals and the Word of God. Here, everything was measured in terms of piety and purity. The town was surrounded by dense forests, the towering pines casting long shadows across the dusty streets. The houses were modest, their wooden facades painted in muted tones of grey and beige, a testament to the community's simple lifestyle. The only splashes of colour came from the vibrant flower boxes that adorned the porches, a silent testament to the enduring beauty of nature, even in a world where beauty was often overshadowed by dogma. At the heart of Hopewell stood a weathered brick building, the Hopewell Community Church. It was more than just a place of worship, it was the centre of the community, the source of their collective identity. It was here, under the watchful eye of the Reverend Silas, that the community found solace, guidance, and a shared sense of belonging. Silas, a man with steely blue eyes and a weathered face etched with a lifetime of piety, had dedicated his life to spreading the word of God and upholding the community's strict moral code. His voice, a booming baritone, echoed through the church, delivering sermons laced with fire and brimstone, warnings of the dangers of sin and the consequences of straying from the righteous path. His teachings, a blend of traditional beliefs and his own interpretations, were accepted without question by his flock. Silas was the shepherd, and his flock, blindly loyal, followed him with unquestioning faith. He had instilled in his followers a deep sense of fear of the outside world, fear of sin, and fear of God's wrath. This fear, carefully nurtured and cultivated, became the foundation of his authority, a powerful tool that he used to control and mold his community into his vision of righteousness. Elias, Silas's only son, was a quiet soul, a gentle spirit trapped in a world of rigid expectations and unwavering obedience. Elias was an artist, his heart filled with a yearning for beauty and expression. He found solace in colors and textures, sketching landscapes and faces in his small, cluttered bedroom. His creativity was a constant source of conflict with his father, who saw it as a dangerous vulnerability, a weakness that needed to be controlled. Elias was surrounded by three older sisters, Martha, Sarah, and Rachel. They were all devout, upholding the strict moral code of Hopewell with an unwavering zeal. They saw their roles as women within the community as that of obedient daughters, devoted wives, and righteous mothers. They were the embodiment of the community's values, their lives dedicated to upholding the strict code of conduct that Silas had established. Martha, the eldest, was a strong-willed woman with a sharp tongue and a keen eye for any deviation from the community's strict moral code. She saw her role as a protector of the community's values, ready to reprimand any member who dared to stray from the righteous path. Sarah, the middle sister, was known for her piety and her devotion to her husband, a deacon in the church. She saw her role as a dutiful wife, her life a testament to her unwavering faith. Rachel, the youngest, was quiet and introverted, but her faith was equally strong, fueled by a deep fear of God's wrath. The sisters were united in their devotion to their father and their unwavering faith in his teachings. They saw Elias, with his creative impulses and his quiet nature, as an anomaly in their family. His artistic tendencies were seen as a dangerous indulgence, a deviation from the path of righteousness that Silas had carefully laid out for them. They often chided Elias for his eccentricities, their voices laced with concern for his soul. But Elias felt suffocated by their constant scrutiny. He yearned for a world where he could express his creativity without judgment, where he could be himself without fear of rejection. He saw the world differently, his imagination filled with vibrant colors and textures that defied the stark, monochrome landscape of Hopewell. He found solace in the quiet moments, sketching and painting, his art a way to express the emotions that he couldn't speak aloud. Hopewell, with its unwavering faith and rigid morals, was a world of shadows and secrets. It was a place where the fear of exposure, of being different, was a constant presence. It was in this world that Elias, yearning for liberation and self-expression, would find his true self in the most unexpected of places, a place that was considered anathema to the very fabric of his community, the world of drag. The internet, a forbidden fruit for most in Hopewell, was a portal to a world beyond the confines of their small town. Elias, with a cautiousness born of fear, began venturing online. He sought solace in digital spaces, finding escape in music, art, and stories that spoke to a world beyond his own. It was in one of these digital wanderings, a rabbit hole of online videos, that he encountered the vibrant, flamboyant world of drag. He watched, mesmerized, as drag performers transformed themselves, their bodies and faces becoming canvases for artistry, their personas a celebration of self-expression and self-acceptance. They embodied an energy that was both liberating and terrifying, an antithesis to the rigid code of Hopewell. He found himself drawn to this world, to the beauty, the theatricality, the freedom of self-invention. It was a world where he could explore his creativity without judgment, a world where he could be whoever he wanted to be. This world, so different, so forbidden, became a refuge for him, a secret he held close to his heart, a yearning he could only express in the quiet, lonely moments of his life. The scent of honeysuckle clung to the summer air, a sweet reminder of the fleeting beauty of the season. It was a Sunday afternoon in Hopewell, and the church was filled with the quiet murmur of prayers and hymns. But in the small, cluttered bedroom upstairs in the Silas house, a storm was brewing. Elias sat at his desk, his fingers tracing the outline of a sketch. His heart ached with a longing he couldn't name, a yearning for a world beyond the walls of his home, a world where his creativity could bloom unhindered. He had been experimenting with makeup, his fingers hesitantly applying shades of pink and purple, mimicking the drag queens he saw online. He was drawn to their beauty, their flamboyance, their sheer freedom of expression. His secret, carefully hidden away, was a fragile flame that flickered beneath the surface of his carefully constructed facade. He had never dared to reveal his true self to his family. The thought of their judgment, their disapproval, their fear, was too much to bear. But his secret wasn't as secure as he thought. Silas, with a keen sense of observation honed over years of leading his flock, had noticed subtle changes in his son. The hushed whispers on the phone, the secretive glances at his laptop, the late nights spent alone in his room, all pointed toward a secret that he was determined to uncover. One day, while Elias was away at a youth group meeting, Silas took it upon himself to search his son's bedroom. His eyes, keen and sharp, fell upon a hidden compartment in Elias's dresser drawer. He opened it, revealing a stash of makeup, wigs, and costume jewelry, the remnants of Elias's forays into the forbidden world of drag. Silas, a man of unwavering faith and unwavering convictions, was horrified. He saw these items as a sign of his son's corruption, a testament to his descent into the depths of sin. His heart hardened, his mind filled with a sense of righteous anger. The news of Silas's discovery spread through the community like wildfire. He shared his findings with the church elders, his voice ringing with a mixture of fury and righteousness. He told them of Elias's transgression, his descent into the depths of depravity. The community, steeped in fear and steeped in faith, rallied behind their shepherd, their hearts filled with a righteous indignation. Silas, driven by a misplaced sense of responsibility for his son's soul, saw only one way to cleanse Elias of this evil: an exorcism. He believed that his son had been possessed by demons, and that only through a ritualistic cleansing could he be saved. He called for a community gathering, a solemn assembly, to pray for Elias and confront the demonic forces that threatened his soul. Silas gathered the community in the church, his eyes burning with a fierce intensity. He told them that Elias, under the influence of the devil, had succumbed to the temptations of the flesh, becoming a vessel for evil. He warned them of the dangers of straying from the righteous path, his voice dripping with a venomous anger. The community listened, their faces a mixture of fear and fanaticism, their hearts filled with a mixture of pity for Elias and fear for themselves. They saw Elias as a fallen angel, a lost sheep that needed to be brought back to the fold. As the evening drew to a close, Silas, with the community at his side, prepared for the ritual. He saw it as a chance to redeem his son, to cleanse him of the evil that had taken root within him. Elias, unaware of the dark storm brewing around him, was preparing for his next secret outing. He had been invited to perform at a local drag show, a chance to step fully into his alter ego Scarlet. He was nervous, but the thrill of being himself, of expressing his true self, outweighed his fear. He felt, for the first time, a sense of purpose and belonging. He didn't know that his secret world, the world he had carefully constructed, was about to come crashing down around him. The veil of secrecy that had protected him was about to be torn away, revealing a truth that would have devastating consequences. The gathering in the church, the community's hushed whispers, the looming shadow of the exorcism, all of this was hidden from Elias, a storm brewing in the distance, as he readied himself for his night as Scarlet. The night air was thick with a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. Hopewell, usually a quiet town, was abuzz with activity. Word of Elias's possession had spread like wildfire, and the community gathered at the church, their faces lit by a strange mixture of fear and fanaticism. Inside the church, the air felt heavy, thick with the scent of incense and the murmur of prayers. Silas, his face taut with a mixture of righteousness and determination, stood at the front, his voice booming with conviction. He had assembled the community, their faces solemn, their eyes filled with fear. He told them of Elias's sins, his descent into the depths of depravity. He described the objects found in his room, the makeup, the wigs, the costumes, as evidence of his demonic possession. He spoke of the dangers of straying from the righteous path, his words laced with a venomous anger that sent chills down the spines of his listeners. He spoke of the need for a cleansing, a ritualistic exorcism to rid Elias of the demonic forces that had taken hold of him. The community, swayed by Silas's words and their own fear, agreed. Elias, unaware of the terrifying events unfolding around him, was preparing to head out for his drag performance. He felt a surge of excitement, a sense of anticipation as he transformed into Scarlet, his true self. His heart fluttered with a mixture of nervousness and exhilaration. He was ready to be himself, to express the vibrant colors and textures of his soul. He walked towards the door, a sense of freedom tingling through him. He had finally found a place where he could be himself, where he could escape the stifling judgment of his family and community. But as he reached for the doorknob, a hand clamped down on his shoulder, stopping him in his tracks. It was Martha, her face pale and her eyes wide with a mix of fear and desperation. "Villia," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of concern and conviction, "you need to come back with us. Father says you're sick. that you're not yourself. You need to be cleansed." Elias, confused and frightened, tried to pull away, but his sisters, Sarah and Rachel, joined Martha, their grips tightening around his arms. Their voices, hushed and frantic, urged him to comply, to return home for his own good. They told him that Silas had been fasting and praying for him, that he was trying to cleanse him of the evil that had taken hold of him. They urged him to trust his father, to believe in their love and their desire to help him. Elias, caught between his desire for freedom and his fear of his family's disapproval, felt a chilling premonition. He tried to explain, to tell them that he was fine, that he wasn't possessed by demons, but his words were lost in their fear-driven whispers. Silas, with a chilling determination, had already initiated his plan. He had used his authority to persuade his daughters that Elias was possessed by demons, that he needed their help to save his soul. He had isolated Elias, denying him access to food and communication, allowing fear and suspicion to fester in his heart. He had carefully cultivated a sense of dread and desperation, claim on his son's love for his family, and his fear of being ostracized. He had also instructed his daughters to cover Elias's face with a thick cloth, claiming it was to prevent the demon from entering Elias's body through his eyes and mouth. The cloth, dark and suffocating, left Elias in a state of confusion and fear. They led him back to the church, their grip on his arms tight, their eyes filled with a desperate hope that their brother could be saved. Elias, a prisoner of his own family, was dragged into the church, his last glimpses of the world outside fading into the darkness. Inside the church, the ritual intensified, the community's voices rising in a frenzied chorus. Silas, with a chilling determination, began to lay hands on Elias, his face contorted with an almost religious ecstasy. The community joined him, their hands hovering over Elias's body, their voices chanting in unison. The ritual began with a fervent prayer, a plea to God to cleanse Elias of his demonic possession. Silas, with a menacing glint in his eyes, wielded a Bible as a weapon against the unseen forces he claimed were possessing Elias. The elders, their faces pale with fear and fanaticism, joined Silas, their hands outstretched, their voices chanting in unison. Silas, fueled by a mixture of misguided righteousness and a deep-seated fear of his son's deviation from the path of piety, was determined to rid Elias of the evil that had taken root within him. He saw himself as a savior, a warrior against the forces of darkness, his mission to cleanse his son and protect his community. His actions, however, were fueled by a darkness of his own. He had been tormented by Elias's sins for years, his heart hardened by his own rigid interpretation of faith. He had allowed his fear and his own self-righteousness to consume him, turning him into a monster in the eyes of his son. Silas began to shout, his voice hoarse with rage and fervor. He commanded the demons to leave Elias's body, his words laced with a terrifying intensity. He grabbed Elias, his grip powerful and forceful, forcing him to kneel before the congregation. The elders, their eyes filled with a fanatical zeal, began to beat Elias with their Bibles, their voices rising in a chant of condemnation. They saw him as a vessel of evil, a threat to the purity of their community, and their actions, fueled by their twisted faith, became a grotesque spectacle of violence. The church echoed with the sound of Elias's muffled cries, his pleas for mercy lost in the cacophony of the ritual. Silas, with a chilling conviction, continued his assault, his face twisted with a mixture of rage and ecstasy. He saw himself as a warrior against the forces of evil, a savior of his son's soul, but his actions were fueled by a darkness of his own, a twisted sense of righteousness, a fear of the unknown, and a desperate attempt to control a world he could no longer comprehend. Silas's violence escalated. He slammed Elias's head against the floor, the sickening thud echoing through the church. He kicked and punched Elias, his blows fueled by a deep-seated hatred for his son's deviation from the path of piety. The community, overwhelmed by the intensity of the ritual, their own fear and fanaticism reaching a fever pitch, became complicit in the violence. They joined Silas, their voices growing louder, their hands striking Elias with a frenzy. Elias, battered and bruised, his body racked with pain, tried to defend himself. His cries for mercy fell on deaf ears. He was caught in a whirlwind of violence, his soul crushed beneath the weight of his family's misguided faith and the community's blind devotion. As the ritual reached its climax, Elias, his body worn, his spirit broken, succumbed to the violence. His breath hitched, his eyes glazed over, and he collapsed, a silent testament to the destructive power of faith gone mad. The community, their voices now quiet, their faces pale with shock and guilt, stood over Elias's lifeless body. Silas, his face smeared with sweat and blood, stared down at his son, his eyes vacant, his soul consumed by a chilling emptiness. Silas's actions were driven by a misplaced sense of responsibility, a twisted interpretation of faith, and a deep-seated fear of the unknown. His violence was a result of his own warped belief system, a belief system that had blinded him to the humanity of his own son. The news of Elias's death spread through Hopewell like a dark cloud, the whispers of his tragic fate echoing through the streets. The community, consumed by fear and guilt, shrouded themselves in an even deeper veil of piety, clinging to the comforting embrace of Silas's leadership. But the truth, like a stubborn weed, refused to be buried. It whispered through the cracks of the town's carefully constructed facade, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath its surface. It was a truth that would eventually come to light, a truth that would expose the horrifying secrets of Hopewell. The whispers reached the ears of Assistant Attorney General Amelia Hayes, a woman with a keen eye for injustice and an unwavering belief in the power of truth. She had a reputation for uncovering the darkest secrets, for exposing the corrupt and the wicked. She had seen countless cases of faith gone mad, of religious extremism twisted for the sake of control and power. Amelia, driven by a sense of justice and a profound empathy for those who were marginalized and oppressed, took a personal interest in Elias's case. She felt a deep sense of sorrow for the young man who had been tragically killed, and she was determined to expose the truth, to bring those responsible for his death to justice. She knew that the road ahead would be long and arduous. She knew that she would be facing a community steeped in faith and a leader who wielded his religious authority with an iron fist. But she was undeterred. She had seen the darkness before, and she knew that the only way to fight it was with the light of truth. A picture of Elias's smiling face, plastered across the front page of the local newspaper, had caught her attention. The article, titled "Tragic Accident," described Elias's death as a result of a medical event during a prayer session, a carefully crafted narrative that reeked of a cover-up. The story of Elias's death, shrouded in secrecy and veiled in piety, resonated deeply within her. She felt a deep sense of sorrow for the young man who had been tragically killed, and she was determined to expose the truth, to bring those responsible for his death to justice. She knew that the road ahead would be long and arduous. She knew that she would be facing a community steeped in faith and a leader who wielded his religious authority with an iron fist. But she was undeterred. She had seen the darkness before, and she knew that the only way to fight it was with the light of truth. Amelia began her investigation with a meticulousness that was a hallmark of her work. She started by researching the Hopewell Community Church, delving into its history, its teachings, and its leadership. She scoured the records of previous events, looking for any signs of similar incidents of religious extremism gone awry. She had a hunch that this wasn't an isolated incident, that Silas had a pattern of behavior, a history of using his religious authority to control and manipulate others. Her investigation led her to a number of disturbing reports about the church's past. She found records of similar exorcisms, events that bore a striking resemblance to Elias's death. The stories were often hushed up, dismissed as accidents or the result of individual misconduct. But Amelia, with her keen eye for detail, saw the pattern, the subtle signs of a dark undercurrent that ran through the community's core. Her investigation also led her to uncover whispers of Elias's secret life. She found online accounts of his performances as Scarlet, his flamboyant drag persona. She discovered his involvement in the local drag community, his passionate pursuit of self-expression, and his yearning for acceptance. She pieced together the puzzle, slowly revealing the truth about Elias's life and death. She saw a young man who was struggling to find his place in a world that seemed determined to silence him, who was seeking solace in a world that was considered anathema to his own community. The more she learned, the more convinced she became that Elias's death was not a tragic accident, but a deliberate act of violence, fueled by fanaticism, prejudice, and a twisted sense of righteousness. Amelia was determined to uncover the truth. She knew that she would face resistance from the community, that Silas would try to protect his power and his secrets. She knew that she would have to navigate a world where faith was used as a weapon, a world where those who dared to be different were considered enemies. But Amelia was ready. She was a warrior for justice, a defender of the vulnerable, and she would not rest until the truth was revealed, until those responsible for Elias's death were held accountable. She had chosen her path, and she would follow it, even if it meant facing the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of Hopewell. She had a hunch that Silas, driven by his distorted beliefs, was not a man who would be easily defeated, but she was determined to bring him down, to expose his manipulation and his violence, to bring justice for Elias, and to protect the vulnerable from his hateful grip. She had a long road ahead of her, a journey into the heart of darkness, but she would not falter. She would fight for Elias, and she would fight for the truth. Amelia's investigation, like a carefully crafted puzzle, was slowly starting to come together. She'd pieced together the fragmented truths about Elias's life, his yearning for self-expression, his secret life as Scarlet, his tragic death. She had also begun to understand the dark heart of the Hopewell Community Church, its twisted interpretation of faith, and the grip that Silas had on his flock. She had secured testimonies from former members of the church, people who had escaped the suffocating grip of Silas's control. They spoke of their fear, their vulnerability, and the constant threat of punishment for any deviation from the community's strict code of conduct. They told stories of Silas's manipulation, his abuse of power, and his use of faith as a tool for control. The community, however, remained steadfast in their support for Silas. They saw him as a protector, a shepherd guiding them through a world of darkness. The whispers of scandal, the questions about Elias's death, were quickly dismissed as the work of outsiders, fueled by jealousy and a lack of understanding of their faith. The community, bound together by shared beliefs and a deep-seated fear of the unknown, were reluctant to question Silas's authority. The church, its doors tightly shut against the outside world, served as a fortress against the perceived threats of the modern world. But Amelia, with her keen eye for truth, wasn't deterred. She knew that beneath the facade of piety, there was a dark undercurrent of fear and manipulation. She was determined to expose Silas's crimes, to break through the community's carefully constructed walls of denial. She gathered evidence from Elias's computer, finding his secret online exchanges with the drag community. She uncovered his interactions with other performers, his excitement for his upcoming performances, and his longing for a world where he could be his true self. She found a world of color and vibrancy hidden beneath the dark veil of his life in Hopewell. She also unearthed evidence of Silas's meticulous planning and execution of Elias's murder. She found handwritten notes detailing the exorcism plan, the steps to ensure that Elias's death was deemed an accident. She found emails between Silas and the church elders confirming their complicity in his actions. The evidence, meticulously compiled, presented a clear picture of a meticulously orchestrated murder, a crime driven by a twisted sense of righteousness and a deep-seated fear of the unknown. It was a picture of faith gone mad, of a leader who had used his authority to manipulate and control his flock, a picture of a community consumed by fear and blinded by its own prejudices. With the evidence secure, Amelia knew it was time to take her case to court. She knew that it would be a difficult battle, a struggle against a community steeped in faith and a leader who wielded his religious authority with an iron fist. But she was determined to bring Silas and his accomplices to justice. The news of Amelia's investigation spread through Hopewell, creating a ripple of uncertainty within the community. The whispers of scandal, once dismissed as the work of outsiders, were now taking root within the community, stirring a sense of unease and doubt. Silas, sensing the shift in the tide, reaffirmed his control. He rallied his followers, reminding them of the dangers of the outside world, the importance of unwavering faith, and the need for a unified front against the forces of darkness. He warned them of the consequences of questioning his authority, reminding them of the strength of their community and the protection they found under his guidance. But the whispers continued, fueled by Amelia's investigation and the growing awareness of the community's secrets. They became a chorus of doubt, echoing through the streets, questioning Silas's actions and the community's blind loyalty. The town of Hopewell, a community once united by faith and tradition, was starting to fracture. The veil of secrecy was slowly being lifted, revealing a darkness that had long lurked beneath its surface. Amelia's investigation was a catalyst, a spark that ignited a fire of questioning and doubt, shaking the very foundations of the community. The courtroom in the small county courthouse was packed. Word of the trial had spread far beyond Hopewell, drawing a diverse crowd of reporters, legal experts, and curious onlookers. The air was thick with anticipation, the murmurs of conversation punctuated by the occasional cough or rustle of papers. Silas sat at the defendant's table, his face grim, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. He was flanked by his lawyers, men with polished suits and carefully crafted smiles, their eyes gleaming with a calculated confidence. Silas, however, seemed to shrink under the weight of the scrutiny, his once booming voice now reduced to a low murmur. Amelia, standing before the jury, her posture straight, her voice firm and unwavering, presented her case. She spoke of Elias's life, his artistic spirit, his yearning for self-expression, and the tragic way his life had been cut short. She spoke of the Hopewell Community Church, its history, its teachings, and the dangerous grip Silas had on his followers. She presented the evidence, meticulously compiled, painting a picture of a meticulous plan, a calculated act of violence, driven by a distorted sense of righteousness and a deep-seated fear of the unknown. She laid out Silas's manipulation of his family, his use of fear and guilt to control his community, his deliberate denial of food and communication to weaken Elias. She presented the notes Silas had written, the emails he had sent, the testimonies from former members of the church. She described the brutality of the exorcism, the pain and suffering inflicted on Elias, the community's complicity in the violence. Amelia's words were laced with a quiet fury, a righteous anger that resonated with the jury. She had painted a stark picture of a community consumed by fear, blinded by prejudice, and manipulated by a leader who wielded his religious authority as a weapon. The courtroom fell silent as Amelia displayed the pictures of Elias's battered body, his face covered with the cloth, his eyes forever closed, his spirit extinguished. The jurors, some visibly moved, some visibly disturbed, stared at the images, their faces a mixture of shock and sadness. Silas, his gaze fixed on the floor, remained silent. His lawyers, however, fought back, arguing that Elias's death was an accident, a tragic consequence of a misguided attempt to cleanse him of demonic possession. They presented their own witnesses, members of the community who spoke of Silas's piety, his unwavering faith, and his dedication to protecting his flock. They portrayed Silas as a victim of circumstance, a man of God who had acted in accordance with his beliefs. They tried to undermine Amelia's case, casting doubt on the testimonies of former members, painting them as disgruntled individuals seeking revenge. They dismissed the evidence, labeling it circumstantial, claiming that there was no proof of a premeditated murder. Amelia, with a powerful closing statement, argued that the jury had a responsibility to stand against hatred, to protect the rights of the vulnerable, to ensure that no one was ever again subjected to the horrors that Elias had endured. She urged them to see beyond the veil of piety, to recognize the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of the community. She reminded them of the power of truth, of the importance of standing up for what is right, of fighting for justice, even in the face of fear and prejudice. The courtroom was silent, the air thick with a palpable tension. The jury retired to deliberate, their faces a mixture of seriousness and concern. The fate of Silas, the future of the Hopewell Community Church, and the legacy of Elias hung in the balance. The courtroom was a sea of anticipation, the air thick with the weight of unspoken tension. The jury had retired hours ago, and the silence in the courtroom, broken only by the occasional rustle of papers or the hushed whispers of the onlookers, was almost deafening. Silas sat at the defendant's table, his face grim, his eyes fixed on the floor. Amelia stood behind the table, her posture straight, her eyes unwavering. The courtroom door creaked open and the jury filed back in. The tension in the room intensified, the whispers ceased, and all eyes turned to the jury box. The jury foreman, a man with kind eyes and a weathered face, rose to his feet, holding a piece of paper in his hands. He cleared his throat, his voice calm but firm, as he announced the verdict. Guilty. The courtroom erupted. Journalists scribbled frantically in their notebooks. Cameras flashed and murmurs of relief and satisfaction rippled through the audience. Silas, his face frozen in a mask of disbelief, stared at the jury, his eyes wide with shock and horror. Amelia, a wave of emotion washing over her, felt a surge of relief mixed with a profound sadness. She knew that this victory, while bittersweet, was a significant step in the fight for justice. She had brought a murderer to account, exposed the dark secrets of a community, and shattered the illusion of piety that had shielded Silas for so long. The community of Hopewell, their eyes fixed on Silas, seemed to shrink under the weight of the truth. They had lived in a world where faith was the ultimate authority, where Silas's word was law. But now, the veil of secrecy had been lifted, and the truth, brutal and unforgiving, had been revealed. The news of Silas's conviction spread like wildfire, igniting a wave of relief and hope throughout the nation. The Hopewell Community Church, once a symbol of faith and tradition, was now synonymous with manipulation, fear, and violence. The community, shattered by the revelation of their past, was left to grapple with the consequences of their actions, to reconcile their beliefs with the truth that had been exposed. The veil of secrecy that had shielded them from the outside world had been torn away, leaving them vulnerable and exposed. Silas, once a powerful figure, was now a prisoner, his reign of terror over. He sat in his cell, the walls closing in on him, the weight of his crimes pressing down on his soul. He had built his life on faith, his power on the fear he had instilled in his followers, but now he was stripped of his authority, his world crumbling around him.